Back in the 13th century, one of the kings of England, King Ferdinand II, was kind of a crazy sort of a guy, and he tried a very warped experiment. He wanted to know what language a baby would speak if that baby never heard a language. And so what he did is he took 50 newborn infants, he put them together in a large room, he hired people to take care of them, but here were their instructions. Other than changing, clothing, feeding, they were not to speak to the child, they were not to touch the child, they weren't to pick the child up, they weren't to go, oh, coochie, nothing. Because he wanted to know, without that kind of contact, what language would these kids grow up to actually speak? Kind of a warped experiment, right? You know what the results were? Never found out. Because within 1 year, every child was dead. They were cared for, they had food, they had clothes, the environment there was right, but within 1 year, every child passed away. Because there is something about an infant that just requires some measure of touch, some sort of physical and emotional nurturing. See, we human beings are simply wired up this way. We require touch. We require some measure of loving physical contact in order for us to develop property and remain healthy. It's fascinating what contemporary studies show. Contemporary studies show that as young girls are growing up, their need for touch increases dramatically when they get into the preteen and early teen years. They need appropriate, loving touches. Unfortunately, right about this time, their bodies are changing, and many dads start to feel uncomfortable with touching their preteen and teenage daughter because she's turning into a woman, and all sorts of dynamics are going on. And it's like, as the need goes up, the discomfort also goes up, and many of the touches that their daughter requires aren't given. You know what the same studies show? They show that when there is a healthy amount of appropriate loving touches that are given to a preteen and teenage girl, they are far more likely to resist and say no to unhealthy, inappropriate touches in their lives by people with less than honorable intentions. There's a strength, there's a health that gets imparted and communicated just in physical touch. And guess what? The same studies also reveal that while the girls have that great need, the boys' need, get this, is just as big or bigger. But boy, talk about difficulty in our culture. You know, what's the right kind of touches to do with your developing boy? Right? You know, you can't just kind of hold them and put their head on his shoulder. I have a good day. I mean, it doesn't work. I mean, the touches need to look a little bit different, but they need to be touched. I remember when my kids were much younger, we had this little game we played, and we got borrowed a phrase from Dr. Seuss. We called it hop on pop. And I'd be like sitting on the couch or sitting on the floor, and we'd be watching TV or something, and all of a sudden one of my kids would go, hop on pop! And I'd brace myself because it would be one after the other. Sometimes all three boys, or sometimes all five of my kids, and they're ganging up, and it's like a gang wrestling match, right? 1 on 5, and my job was to get away, and I could never do it. They're grabbing on my legs, they're trying to keep me from crawling out of the room, and I'd collapse under their incredible power. It was all about touch. It was all about finding appropriate physical contact. Because something life-giving, something healthy, something empowering gets transmitted to a person when they are touched in a loving, appropriate way. I think Jesus got this. Because Jesus is responsible for creating humans. And he normally made them. Isn't it fascinating that when Jesus would go around healing people, he almost always healed by doing what? This was a clue. He almost always healed them by doing what? Yeah, by touch. He would touch them. Did he have to touch them to heal them? Absolutely not. There are cases in the Bible where Jesus simply said a word, be healed. Boom, they were healed. No touch, wasn't required. There were even times that people healed people that weren't in the room. They were in a different location, and Jesus said, don't worry, they're healed. And then people went back, yep, they were healed. Touch was not required in the whole healing thing. But when Jesus would heal people, he would almost invariably lay his hands on them. And we're not talking about touch like this. The word actually indicates an embrace. A lingering, kind, and loving touch. You know what's fascinating? Every time we know of that Jesus would heal a leper, and he healed a bunch, it involves some sort of physical touch. And here's what's fascinating. In that day and in that culture, if you got the disease of leprosy, you were considered what they called unclean. It meant that in some way you were under the judgment of God, and therefore you were going to be under the judgment of people. You were excluded from any religious or spiritual goings on, and you were also excluded from the social community. You were not allowed to be with other people, you were not allowed to interact with other people, and you could never, ever, ever touch another person. In fact, if somebody touched you as a leper, they became unclean. They had to put in isolation for weeks and weeks and weeks to make sure they were infected by whatever horrible thing that you had. So here are lepers. They can't be touched. They're excluded from the worship of God, excluded from the social goings on, their own. And here is Jesus going to heal them. On some occasions it says they cried out to Jesus for healing. You know why they cried out rather than went up? They weren't about to approach him. That was all wrong. And by the way, one of the first things to be affected by leprosy are your vocal cords. And so their voice would have been very, very ratchety and weak. It would have been this pathetic sound coming out of these bodies that are literally falling apart. You know, Jesus, have mercy, heal me. And Jesus would almost invariably walk over to them, and he would lay his hands on them. He would embrace them and heal them. And he didn't have to touch to heal. So why did he do it? Could it be that Jesus just knew that there was something else in them that needed to be healed than just their body? That there was something emotionally, there was something physically that needed to be healed as well. And just human touch has the power to help give that strength and healing. And isn't there something about us that somehow we just sense that? Are there not moments when people are weak, vulnerable, broken, confused, that something inside just says, I need to touch them somehow? There's a scene from a great movie, great story called Good Will Hunting. If you struggle with language, do not watch the movie. In fact, I want to show you a clip, and yes, I had to bleep out certain words. But I want you to look at this scene, and I want you to tell me what you would feel compelled to do, and how appropriate you feel the person in the room with the main character was when he did what he did. It's when the main character, the Matt Damon character, Will Hunting, comes to grips with the fact that one of the reasons he's so messed up was he was neglected and abused by his own father. And this is what happened.